My name is Kara, and this happened in December of 2008. I was 11 years old then. I'm old enough now to understand how memory can warp things, how fear can stretch moments, how your brain fills in gaps. I've tried to convince myself that's what happened, but there are details from that night that feel too sharp to be imagined. The power went out just after dinner. One second, the TV was murmuring in the background. The next, it was like the house had been unplugged from the world. My mom went straight into calm mode. She lit candles from the cabinet we only opened during outages and talked through it like a plan. One for the kitchen, one for the hallway, one for the living room. My dad headed to the basement to check the breaker, even though we already knew the whole neighborhood was dark. That's what he always did, try to fix something, even when it wasn't fixable. Outside, the storm was aggressive. Snow flew sideways, hitting the windows in thick clumps before scraping off again. The wind didn't howl so much as shove, like it was testing the house again and again. My mom dragged couch cushions to the floor and called it camping. She made hot chocolate on the gas stove. I built a little blanket fort under the coffee table. For a while, it felt like an adventure. That's how blackouts are for kids. Fun at first. Then you start listening. The house creaked in places I'd never noticed. Every sound felt louder without the usual background noise. Lightning cracked somewhere far off. Winter lightning is different. It doesn't linger. It snaps the world into view for a split second, then drops it back into darkness. The first flash just showed snow. The yard looked erased, the fence barely visible. The second flash showed a person. He was standing in our yard, near the middle, where my dad usually piled snow after shoveling. Just a dark shape against all that white. My first thought was childish logic. It's probably someone we know, maybe a neighbor checking on us. That thought lasted half a second. Nobody was outside in weather like that. You couldn't see 2 houses down. The weather radio kept repeating the same warning in a flat, mechanical voice. I must have made a sound because my dad came over fast. "What are you doing?" he asked. "There's someone outside," I said. He stared out into the storm. Without the lightning, there was nothing to see. "There's nobody there," my mom said gently, stepping closer. Then the next flash came. The man was closer. Not a little closer, clearly closer. Now near the fence line, angled toward the house. Still standing the same way, not bracing against the wind, not moving at all. I watched my dad's shoulders tighten. He didn't say anything. He just stepped away from the window. "No more looking," my mom said quickly. She closed the curtain even though it didn't block the light from the lightning. It felt like pulling a blanket up against fear. But I kept peeking. I was 11. Curiosity always beat obedience by just enough. The next flash came sooner. The man was closer again. Now he was near the edge of the yard where snow drifted up against the house. His posture hadn't changed. It was like he wasn't moving between flashes, like each burst of light was just updating his position. That was the detail that stuck with me. People move when they're outside in a storm. They lean, stumble, fight the wind. This man looked like he was standing in a quiet room. My dad checked the locks. Deadbolt. Chain. He jiggled the chain until it sat right. We moved into the hallway, away from the windows. My mom kept her voice light, but her hands stayed on my shoulder. My dad sat upright in a chair, flashlight and hammer in his hands. Like that combination meant something. The lightning kept coming. With the next flash, he was right against the house, standing below the living room window, close enough to touch it. That flash lasted just long enough for me to register more detail. The bulk of his shoulders, the dark shape of a hood or hat, the suggestion of boots. Then the darkness snapped back. A second later, I heard a sound that didn't belong to the storm. A soft scrape along the side of the house. It could have been snow sliding, it could have been anything, but it sounded like movement near the foundation. Nobody spoke. My mom's hand tightened on my shoulder. My dad stood up and stepped toward the living room, slow and careful, like sudden movement might invite something worse. Another flash lit the hallway. I didn't look this time. I stared at the curtain like it was the only thing holding the house together. Nothing happened after that. No knock, no broken glass, just wind and snow and the sound of our breathing. Eventually, the storm eased. The lightning stopped first. My brother fell asleep, my mom dozed, my dad stayed awake, sitting straight-backed until morning. When daylight came, the world looked calm again. Snow lay smooth and clean, like the night had been erased. My dad went outside alone first. He walked the yard slowly, scanning. There was no man, no damage, no footprints leading away. Then he pointed. Deep boot prints pressed into the snow right up against the house beneath the living room window. Close enough that someone standing there could have leaned into the glass. My parents didn't talk about it much after that. They blamed the storm. They blamed tricks of light. But my dad shoveled that spot first before the sun could soften the snow. I grew up and stopped being scared of storms, but I never stopped being scared of someone standing still. I'm a mechanic. I don't say that to sound tough. It just means I'm wired to trust what I can see, measure, and fix. Winters up here in Presque Isle, Maine are the same way. You don't romanticize them. You prepare. That storm had been coming for days. Heavy snow, high wind, the kind of forecast that clears roads and keeps people inside. I topped off the generator, stacked firewood by the door, charged my phone and backup battery, and left the shovel leaning against the wall like I always do. I lived alone a few minutes outside town, quiet even on good nights. When the storm rolled in, the quiet changed. Snow swallowed sound. Wind pressed against the house like it wanted something. I made coffee even though it was late, watched half a movie without following it, checked the clock, and thought I should sleep before the power decided otherwise. That's when I heard the voice. At first, I thought it was the TV. Then I remembered the TV was just static. Cable had gone out hours earlier. The sound came again. Please, help me. It was a kid's voice. I stood up slowly. Your brain does this thing where it tries to protect you from jumping to conclusions. It tells you there's a reasonable explanation that you'll feel stupid in a second. But it was past midnight. The storm was heavy. Roads were dead. No kid should have been anywhere near my porch. I moved toward the front window and leaned just enough to see out. The porch light cast a weak yellow glow through blowing snow. I didn't see a child. I saw footprints. They led straight from the yard to the porch steps. Deep impressions in fresh snow. Wide. Heavy. Adult boot prints. Long stride. Thick tread. No small steps mixed in. No dragging marks. Nothing that matched a child struggling through snow. The voice came again. Help me. It sounded closer. I went to the door but didn't touch the lock. Who's there? I called. There was a pause, long enough to make me wonder if I'd imagined it. Then the voice answered, same tone as before. I'm cold. Let me in. The words felt wrong. Not because a kid wouldn't say them, but because it sounded like someone repeating a line they'd learned. I should have called 911 immediately. I know that now. But I hesitated, caught between instinct and guilt. If it really was a kid, ignoring it felt wrong. If it wasn't, opening the door felt worse. I grabbed my phone and aimed the camera through the peephole. Snow smeared the lens, glare swallowed detail. Nothing, no shape, no movement. Just snow and the porch light buzzing faintly. But the footprints were still there. Solid, undeniable. The voice came again, this time from the side of the porch, near the window. "Please, help me." I moved to the window and looked out. Same prints, no new tracks leading around the house, no indication anything had moved. Snow doesn't miss footsteps. Snow keeps records. "Who's out there?" I said again, louder. "I'm cold," the voice replied. Same calm delivery. I stepped back and called 911. The dispatcher sounded tired, strained. I gave my address and explained child's voice, adult footprints. She told me response time would be delayed due to the storm. Told me not to open the door. "I'm not," I said. The moment I hung up, the voice returned. "Help me." I stayed quiet. It spoke again. "Let me in." Now it sounded closer to the door. I stood with my back to the wall, listening. The house creaked. Wind rattled the siding. Then the voice came from the living room side of the house. "I'm cold." I moved to that window, looked out. Nothing. The yard was smooth except for the original boot prints leading to the porch. That's when something clicked in my head. If the voice was moving, the snow should show it. It didn't. I stayed up the rest of the night. Lights low, TV off, phone in my hand. The voice came and went, always the same phrases. Sometimes near the door, sometimes near a window. At one point I whispered, "What do you want?" Nothing answered. Then, minutes later, "Help me." Sometime before dawn, it stopped completely. Just gone. The silence afterward felt heavier than the storm. Morning came gray and still. Snow piled high against the door. I opened the curtain slowly. The footprints were gone, buried by the fresh snow. But if I close my eyes, I can see them in my mind. Large adult tracks paced back and forth like someone had waited. No child's prints. No sign of someone being carried. No clear trail away. Wind had softened the edges just enough to erase direction. That's what stayed with me. Not the voice, not even the idea of someone standing out there all night. It was the design of it. A child's voice is a key. You hear it, and the decent part of you reaches for the lock. I don't know what was outside my house that night. I just know it wanted a door opened, and it didn't care whose voice it used. After that winter, I installed a camera on the porch, upgraded the lights, made sure my phone never dropped below half battery. And on nights when snow buries the road and sound disappears, I still listen. My name is Kara, and this happened in January of 2022. That night, the storm had started earlier in the evening and never let up. Snow came down in thick, steady sheets, and the wind kept pushing it sideways, rattling the siding and making the windows vibrate. It wasn't the worst blizzard Fargo had ever seen, but it was the kind that convinced you to stay inside without question. I was home alone, laptop open on the kitchen counter, finishing notes from work. The TV was on low in the living room. Background noise more than entertainment. My neighborhood is tight and quiet. Houses close together, sidewalks running right past the front windows. From my couch, I can see the street without even leaning forward. Around 10:30 p.m., I stood up to refill my water and looked out the window the way you do without thinking. But then I saw Brent. He lived a few houses down. Quiet guy, Polite. We'd exchanged waves, nothing more. The kind of neighbor you forget about the moment you close your door. He was walking past my house in the storm like it was a mild evening. No coat, no hat, no gloves, just a thin gray sweatshirt and jeans. At first, I assumed he'd stepped out to grab something from his car. People do dumb things in winter. But as he came closer, something felt off. Just wrong in a quiet way. He wasn't hunched against the cold. His hands weren't shoved in his pockets. He wasn't moving quickly. He walked with an easy, even pace, like the weather wasn't touching him at all. Then, as he reached my front window, he turned his head. He looked straight into my living room. I took a step back without meaning to. He didn't slow down, didn't acknowledge me, just kept walking until he disappeared into the snow and darkness near the corner streetlight. I stood there longer than I needed to, waiting for the moment where it made sense. It didn't. I checked the time, 10:38 p.m. I went back to my laptop and tried to focus, but the image kept replaying. Mostly the way his posture hadn't changed. Anyone else would have been bracing against the wind. He'd moved like it was 60 degrees out. Around 11:40, I got up again. Bathroom, water. Another unconscious look at the window. He was there again, same clothes, still no coat. This time, he was under the streetlight as he approached. Snow clung to his shoulders and hair, but he didn't react to it. When he reached my yard, he looked in again. It felt like checking. I stepped back into the darker part of the room. He passed without stopping, arms loose at his sides. I checked the time again, 11:41 p.m. Now it was a pattern. I locked the front door even though it was already locked. Checked the back door. Stood in the kitchen for a moment, listening to the wind and trying to talk myself down. People walk at night. Insomnia. Stress. Maybe he was pacing. Maybe he'd had a fight. None of those explanations felt solid, but they were better than the alternative. At 12:52, he passed again. This time, I didn't move away from the window. I stood still and watched him approach. When he got close, he slowed slightly, just enough to notice. Then he turned his head farther than before, moving it like he was trying to see deeper into the room. Not looking for me, confirming where I was. I turned the TV off. The silence felt safer than noise. At 1:58, he came again. I shut off the lamp in the living room, leaving the room mostly dark, and watched from the hallway. If the light was what he was checking for, maybe this would stop it. It didn't. At 2:59, he passed again. I stood there with my phone in my hand, debating who I could call without sounding ridiculous. My neighbor keeps walking past my house isn't an emergency. It's barely a sentence anyone takes seriously. The last time was 3:11 a.m. I know that because I checked my phone as soon as I saw him under the streetlight. This time, he was closer to my house. Not fully in the yard, but close enough that it felt intentional. He slowed as he reached my window. Then he stopped. He turned his head completely toward the glass, facing the exact spot where I stood in the dark. I couldn't see his eyes clearly, but I could see his face angled with purpose. He didn't squint, didn't shift like someone trying to see into darkness. He held still, like he already knew. I pressed my hand over my mouth, not trusting myself to stay quiet. After a few seconds, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the storm like every other time. That should have been relief. It wasn't, because he didn't leave like someone who gave up. He left like someone who finished a round. I didn't sleep. I sat on my bed with my phone in my hand until the sky lightened and the storm settled into a dull, gray aftermath. By morning, Brent's car was in his driveway. His porch light was off, like nothing had happened. That afternoon, I walked over and knocked on his door, daylight giving me more courage than I deserved. A woman answered. His girlfriend, I assumed. "Hey," I said, forcing casual. "I just wanted to check. Was Brent okay last night? I saw him walking outside during the storm." She frowned. "Brent was home all night." I waited for the correction, the laugh, anything. "He didn't go out," she said. "We watched a movie and went to bed." I nodded like that settled it and walked back to my house. Later, I checked the snow near the sidewalk. Most of it had been blown over, but a few prints remained near the edge of my yard. What bothered me was that I couldn't trace them back to his front door. There was no clean path from his porch to the sidewalk. No neat set of tracks explaining where he came from. Just prints that appeared near my house and faded into nothing. It wasn't that he walked past my home. It was that he did it like a job, like clockwork. And now, whenever storms roll in and the neighborhood goes quiet, I find myself checking the time without meaning to. It was January of 2016. At the time, I was the county road supervisor. If a plow went missing, if a driver stopped answering the radio, if a route didn't get cleared the way it was supposed to, my phone rang. I built the schedules. I knew every road, every driver, every truck. After enough winters, you don't just recognize plows by sight, you recognize them by sound. I also lived far enough out that nobody ever passed my place unless they had a reason. Long gravel driveway, a shed behind the house, no close neighbors, the kind of quiet where you can hear weather coming. That night, the storm wasn't dramatic on paper. No blizzard warnings, just steady snow and wind. The kind that stacks up quietly and blinds you in bursts. I'd stayed late at the office watching the tracker system and radio traffic, making sure the main routes were being hit in order. Everything looked clean. I got home after midnight, kicked off my boots, and sat down with my laptop out of habit. The house creaked the way it always did when the wind pushed against it. Nothing felt off. Then I heard it. Distant at first. A deep rumble, an engine working under load. I stood up and went to the front window. A snowplow passed in front of my house. Except it had no headlights, no beams cutting through the snow, no amber strobes. Just a dark shape moving through darker weather, the plow blade barely visible against the road, and the engine sound was familiar, unmistakable. I watched it pass my driveway and disappear into the storm. My first thought was that someone was being reckless. Running a plow without lights isn't just stupid, it's deadly. My second thought followed immediately. Why was anyone plowing this road? This stretch wasn't assigned that night. It didn't get touched unless the storm was severe. And even then, only after the main routes were cleared. I knew that for a fact. I'd written the schedule myself. I walked back to the table and pulled up the county tracker. Every unit showed exactly where it was supposed to be. I refreshed the screen. Same result. Maybe a contractor, I told myself. A rancher with a retired rig. Wyoming's full of guys who like moving snow more than sleeping. But the engine I'd heard didn't sound like a hobby. I sat there watching the screen, expecting to see the plow swing back around. It didn't. About 45 minutes later, I heard it again. Same engine, same tone. I went back to the window. The plow passed again. Still no headlights. This time it moved slower, like the blade was lower. The road was already filling back in from drifting snow, but I could still see the darker scrape where the blade had passed. For a moment, it looked like the cab angled slightly toward my house, as if the driver had turned to look up at the windows. I can't swear to that part. It could have been wind, could have been my brain trying to assign meaning. But I didn't like it. I called the dispatcher on duty. "Tell me you didn't send anyone down my road," I said. "No," he said immediately. "Nobody's assigned out there. I've got a plow passing my place with the lights off." He checked the system while I waited. "All units are accounted for," he said. "Trackers clean." "A contractor doesn't run dark," I said, "and nobody does multiple passes on a dead road for free." He radioed the drivers anyway. One by one, they answered from where they were supposed to be. Nobody reported being near my road. Nobody reported seeing another unit. When I hung up, I stayed by the window. The storm kept working. Snow skittered across the road in sheets. Everything looked erased, like the land was trying to wipe itself clean. I went to bed after 2, but I didn't sleep right. Every noise pulled me back up. Around 3:30, I heard it again. This time, I didn't go to the front window. I went to the side of the house, the window that faced my shed. The shed sat back from the road, offset just enough that you couldn't see it unless you knew where to look. Inside were tools, salt, chains, and a snowblower that only cooperated when it felt like it. The plow came into view, crawling down the road in that same dark silhouette. No lights. It passed my driveway entrance like before, but instead of continuing straight, it slowed even more and drifted just far enough that the cab lined up with the path behind my shed. Then it moved out of sight. The engine sound didn't fade like it should have if it kept going down the road. It dropped, muffled, like something solid had come between it and me. I stood there listening. The engine idled briefly, then it stopped. Just wind. I didn't go outside. Anyone who says they would hasn't done the math. Low visibility, slick ground, no backup, and whatever was out there had already decided to move without lights. I stayed inside until morning. When daylight came, the storm had eased. I pulled on layers and walked down to the road. The plow tracks were obvious. Wide blade scrape, deep tire treads. No mistaking them. I followed them. They passed my driveway like before. Then, near the spot where my shed sat back from the road, they angled off. Not into my driveway. Off-road. Toward the space behind the shed. I followed. The rest of the snow around the tracks was untouched, which made them feel wrong, like a scar across something smooth. Behind the shed, the tracks stopped, turned around, and returned along the same tracks. It was like someone saying, "Look what I could do with your shed if I wanted." I walked the area looking for anything. Footprints, another sign. There was nothing. I reported it because that's what I do. Filed notes, made calls, told my boss. Nobody laughed, but nobody rushed either. Storm nights scramble logs, GPS pings drop, data goes missing. You can explain missing data, you can't explain where a plow went. The next few nights, every engine sound pulled me to a window. I checked the tracker system more than I needed to, like staring at it could prove the world was behaving. Eventually, new snow covered the tracks. The shed looked normal again. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't, because I still don't believe that plow got lost. I think it found exactly what it came for. And whatever it was, it didn't need headlights to see it. I was 29 and doing delivery work full-time. Long routes, late hours, Whatever kept the bills paid. Winter runs were normal back then. Storms didn't stop orders. People still needed groceries, prescriptions, and supplies, and someone had to bring them. That night, I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was just being careful. The storm had been building all afternoon. By the time I was on the last leg of my route, the snow was coming down sideways, thick enough that my headlights felt more decorative than useful. The radio kept repeating warnings about low visibility and closed roads. I slowed down, leaned forward in my seat, scanned constantly for movement. Snowstorms have a rhythm. Once you've driven through enough of them, you can feel when something breaks that rhythm. That's why I noticed the car immediately. A sedan sat dead center in the road ahead of me. At first, my brain tried to make it normal. Maybe someone slid and stopped. Maybe they pulled over and got stuck. But as I got closer, I saw the driver's door was wide open. Open like someone stepped out and didn't bother finishing the motion. No hazard lights. No interior light. No movement. I eased my truck to a stop well back from it. I didn't want to pull up too close and risk getting stuck if I had to turn around. Snow was already piling against my tires. I rolled the window down and called out, "Hey, you all right?" Nothing came back except wind. I put my hazards on and stepped out into the storm. The cold bit through my jacket immediately, and the snow stung my face like tiny needles. My boots sank into the slush near the edge of the road. The car looked newer than I expected. Clean. Not something you'd expect to see abandoned like this, especially out here. I walked closer, eyes flicking between the open door and the tree line. Inside, the car was dark. No keys, no phone, no bag. The driver's seat was pushed back farther than I'd keep mine. I touched the hood with the back of my glove. Warm. Not, "It's been here all night," warm. Warm like it had been shut off recently. That's when my sense of unease stopped being abstract. If the engine was warm, the driver hadn't left long ago. So where were they? I looked down at the snow near the open door. Footprints. They started right at the driver's side, clean and deep, not messy or confused. They led straight off the road and into the woods, into the trees. I followed the tracks with my eyes, telling myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe they were looking for help. Maybe they thought the road led somewhere else. But the footprints didn't look hesitant. They looked purposeful. I called out again, louder. "Hello? You need help?" Nothing. I took a few cautious steps toward the tree line, not committing, just trying to see past the first row of branches. The woods were black and crowded, snow blowing through the gaps like smoke. The wind made everything sound alive. I reminded myself I wasn't trained for this. I wasn't search and rescue. I was just a delivery driver. Still, the thought kept pushing in. What if someone's hurt? That argument almost worked, until I saw something else. A second set of footprints. They weren't near the car. They were near the edge of the woods. They didn't connect to the first set. They weren't layered or scattered. They were just there, pressed into the snow as if someone had stepped out and stopped, facing the road, facing me. I didn't see anyone. I didn't hear anything. But the way those prints were positioned made my skin tighten, like someone had come out to see who was there, then decided not to move any closer. I felt the urge to look behind me immediately, the kind that doesn't come from logic. That instinct made the decision for me. I backed up slowly, keeping my eyes on the trees without turning fully away. I got back into my truck and locked the doors hard. I sat there for a second with the heater blasting, hands tight on the wheel, trying to talk myself down. Trying to decide if I was about to sound ridiculous calling this in. Then I looked back at the sedan. The door was still open, swaying slightly. Warm engine. Footprints into the woods. Footprints watching the road. I called it in, first to my dispatcher, then to 911. Explaining the location felt harder than it should have, like the storm distorted words the same way it distorted sight. The operator told me units would check when they could, but conditions were bad. She told me to stay in my vehicle and not go into the woods. I didn't argue. After a few minutes, I made the call to turn around. It took some careful maneuvering in the snow, but I managed without sliding off the road. I kind of expected someone to step out of the trees at the last second, forcing me to choose. No one did. I drove away with my hazards on, checking my mirrors like the woods might follow the road. Later, I found out authorities located the sedan after the storm eased, but they didn't find the driver that night. I never heard anything else. No explanation, no closure. What I still think about is how intentional the whole scene felt. The placement, the open door, the warm engine, the way the footprints didn't look lost. It felt like the road had been set up to ask a question I wasn't meant to answer. Snowstorms don't just hide things. They erase timelines, they smooth over choices, they delete endings, and sometimes all you're left with is the feeling that whatever happened was close, too close, and you arrived just late enough to never understand what you almost stepped into. If you also notice that the scariest moments weren't loud, they were quiet, smash that like button, hit subscribe so you never miss the next scare, and tell me which moment stuck with you the most. And if you think Christmas is all warmth and comfort, this next one will ruin that. Click now to watch